We know. Okay, so last time we got together, I gave you a little bit of a preview in regards to what we're going to be talking about today. And that is drift. We are rapidly getting into drift season, so to speak. And we need to have a discussion about what we're going to do to avoid damage to plants as a result of drift of the weed control material that we utilize. So I showed you some of these pictures last time, but let's go over them again real quickly. What we're trying to avoid is what you see here. Herbicide damage to plants begins with leaf curling. There's a tomato plant on the left-hand side, which is particularly vulnerable and susceptible to herbicide damage. And on the right side are the tips of a white pine tree, which are curling in a similar fashion. This is the telltale sign of herbicide damage. Most homeowners wouldn't recognize it at this stage of the game. However, within the next 3 or 4 days, the plants are going to be dead, and they certainly recognize that. Our biggest concern is with vegetable gardens. This was a vegetable garden that we did some serious damage to up the road on Hope Furnace Road in Situate last year. Again, you can see the curling, particularly on the left-hand side. In this particular case, there was some damage done to a number of vegetable plants. Fortunately, a good number of these also recovered, but our problem is more often than not, plants that we are damaging with herbicides are not recovering, such as what they did here. So we are basically causing damage to plants in one of 3 different ways. Direct overspray, and what I mean by that is we simply goof, we make a mistake, and we spray a plant directly with our herbicide. It happens both with our Z sprays as well as with backpack sprayers if you're not careful. In addition to overspray, most of the time where we get ourselves in trouble is with drift. And drift is nothing more than the movement of droplets that are coming out of the end of your nozzle. The movements of droplets that you're intending to go on target to an unintended site. I intended for these droplets to end up on the lawn, and they're drifting in the wind, or they're drifting in air movement, and they're getting on the tomato plant, or they're getting on the pine tree, or whatever the case might be. Drift is the main culprit where we get ourselves in trouble. Volatilization is something entirely different, but we occasionally see damage as a result of volatilization as well. Volatilization is where, when you apply a liquid weed control, it initially ends up on the grass where you intended it to be, or on the weed. Okay. However, at some point in time, the liquid gets converted to a vapor, and that vapor and air currents can move and can cause some damage. We need to talk now about drift and volatilization and what we are doing in order to minimize the chance that we're causing damage to unintended plants, or in most cases to vegetable gardens or shrubs and flowers on customers' property. Just another example of herbicide damage to plants. This was a dead giveaway because it was down low. More than likely, it was direct spray on this particular plant. I think it's a juniper. That could have been caused either by a Z spray boom actually hitting the shrub, or by somebody getting a little too close with it with a backpack sprayer and not being careful in terms of keeping the liquid off of the plant. The reason I say this was probably direct spray was that if it was drift, more than likely the damage would have been across more of the plant. It would have been up higher. Okay, there's nothing that's going to keep drift down low. So it more than likely was caused by direct spray, directly getting the liquid on the shrub itself. So once again, drift, okay, is nothing more than the movement of the spray off target. Our biggest concern is liquid applications of weed control. Now, it's not limited only to weed control. Weed control is what's going to damage flowers and shrubs and vegetables. But we need to also be concerned with other kinds of drift whenever we are applying any liquid application. We're talking here mostly about weed control, but insect control, for example, if we're using liquid insect control to control fleas and ticks, okay, will drift in the exact same manner. You're just generally not going to see the type of damage you're going to see with weed control. So drift, okay, can cause plant death to flowers, shrubs, and vegetables. Vegetables are our biggest problem because they are the most vulnerable to damage from our weed control. We also have to be concerned, however, that we could be causing some beneficial insect injury, particularly to bees and butterflies. You hear about bees all the time now and their susceptibility to pesticides. Most bee people are primarily concerned with insecticides. However, it's a concern also if there's bees in the area causing some damage to bees. Of course, we also have to be concerned about applicator or customer exposure if gift drift becomes a real issue. Keep in mind, drift is illegal, okay? It upsets customers, of course, if you kill their plants, okay? Talk to Michael. Michael knows about that very well, okay? And he's a professional drift dealer, yeah, dealer. Let's say arbitrator, okay? Drift can also lead to fines and lawsuits. The reason drift is illegal, it's not simply the fact that you're killing somebody's plant. All of your pesticide labels, when you read the fine print on the pesticide label, clearly say it's illegal to use this product in a fashion that is going to lead to drift off target, okay? We fully acknowledge that that's sometimes impossible, but we need to do everything we can to minimize the likelihood of drift. What is going to cause drift? Okay, it should be obvious that wind is going to be a drift factor, and we do not want to spray if there is excessive wind. Defining what excessive wind is, however, is the challenge here, because sometimes we can have very windy days and you can be in neighborhoods where there's a lot of trees, you're surrounded by a lot of homes, a lot of trees, and wind isn't a problem. Sometimes wind is a problem in the front yard and it's not a problem in the backyard. Sometimes it's a problem in one neighborhood and you go 3 streets away and it's not a problem at all. So nobody's going to be able to tell you when wind is excessive. That's going to have to be completely up to you. It's somewhat subjective, but just use your better judgment. Would far rather have you write up a "we will be back" form than take the chance if there's a lot of wind and apply broadleaf weed control where you're going to cause some damage. Drift, if it's windy, can somewhat be limited by spraying closer to the ground. Here, I think you all know with a Z spray, you really cannot control the height of the nozzle. However, if you're spraying weeds with a backpack sprayer, try your best to hold the nozzle closer to the ground because it's not going to be as subjected to wind 6 inches off the ground as it would be subjected to wind 2 feet off the ground. Droplet size. It's well known that small droplets are going to drift further, okay? And we can minimize small droplets by making sure we're using the proper nozzles and using low pressure. Proper nozzles, the Z sprays come with proper nozzles on them. So you should never change the nozzles on a Z spray without making sure you're putting the right nozzle on them. Our backpack sprayers, nozzles, when the backpack sprayers come, we throw the nozzles away that come with a backpack sprayer, the plastic nozzles, and we replace it with a stainless steel nozzle. It's got a larger orifice or a larger hole, which is going to minimize pressure and is going to allow for larger droplets. Pressure, if we're spraying with high pressure, pressure alone will cause smaller droplets. So you do not want to overspray or overpressurize the sprayer. In the case of backpack sprayers, don't overpump them. If you're pumping them to the point where it's becoming hard, to pump the handle, you're going way overboard. It should be a slow and steady pumping action as you are using a backpack sprayer. Z sprays, we generally want to limit to no more than 35 PSI. All the Z sprays have a pressure gauge on them. If you're running any higher than 35 PSI, you need to regulate it back down to probably between 30 and 35 PSI. If it's much higher than that, again, you're causing smaller droplets than you need. And as a result, you're running the likelihood of you're going to cause some drift.
So then for a second.
Sure.
One thing we've identified where we've had an issue with drift as it relates to Z sprays and PSIs is we want you to set it probably 30 to 32 in an ideal world. Problem is that's for 3 to 4 nozzles, right? That's for your full boom. When you guys get into areas where you say, hey, I want to shut off the right nozzle, the left nozzle, the center nozzle, or I only want to spray with the center nozzle, however you want to do that, you're taking the same amount of force for the pump and you're now pushing that through one nozzle. So the second you say, I'm going to shut off this nozzle or shut off that nozzle, what's happening is your PSI is jumping from 30 to 60 super fast. And we've noticed we've had some issues there. If you want to drop from 3 nozzles or 4 nozzles down to 1 or 2, that's fine. You also need to adjust your PSI backwards because it will jump around on you. And we've had some pretty hard evidence that we've had some issues with that. You got to make that adjustment. You can't just set it at 35 and go all the live long day because as you're making changes, that PSI is all over the joint.
So in reality, if you're on a good sized lawn, you probably want to set up to 35 with all 3 nozzles on and do all your 3 nozzle spraying, like in the wide open areas.
Yeah.
And then if you're getting into narrow strips or tight areas, and you're going to go down to 2 nozzles or 1 nozzle, make that change once and get back over the lawn and do it again.
It's like
you don't want to be making the change 15 times.
Yes, it's like when you're deflecting with a hand spreader, and okay, the deflector goes down, but then your third hole goes up or down, and you're making that change, and it's like muscle memory. If you spread enough lawns, okay, that's what I got to do. We also have to make this muscle memory too, because again, we've had some pretty concrete evidence that we haven't done that in the past.
Okay, so drift, be careful of wind, droplet size, control droplet size by making sure you're using the right pressure. Volatilization, okay, probably causes some damage as well as drift. I don't think it causes as much damage as drift does. However, we should recognize that high temperatures will encourage volatilization. I don't think on a day like today where it's 60 or 65 degrees, volatilization is a large issue. But if we're in the neighborhood of 85 to 90 degrees, volatilization can very much be a large issue. Much like if you've got a puddle of water and it's going to evaporate much more quickly at 85 degrees than it would evaporate at 60 degrees. It's the same process. Not much you can do about volatilization except for recognizing that in the summer we reduce rates. I think you all know that in the summer Mike tells everybody to cut back on their rates. We do that to reduce the likelihood of volatilization. And we also change products. We change products to a formulation that in general, okay, is less apt to volatilize and cause damage. All right. The other reason you should recognize that we reduce rates, other than trying to minimize volatilization, when the weather is warm, the weed control materials that we use are much more effective. So if you're normally spraying at 1.5 ounces per gallon, and in the summertime it's hot, you can reduce that rate in half, go with 3/4 of an ounce per gallon, and get just as good, if not better, weed control. All right. Sites we need to be extra careful of, okay? Edges near sensitive plants, particularly shrubs, flowers, and vegetable gardens. Apiaries, okay? Apiaries is just a fancy word for a beehive. I think you all know what a beehive looks like, and we need to make certain that we stay away. I'd far rather have the beekeeper call us and say, I've got weeds around my beehive, then for him to call us and say we've done some damage to his beehive. In mind with beehives and apiaries, you probably should glance into adjacent yards, okay, just to make sure there isn't a beehive right on the other side of the hedgerow that you could get yourself into trouble with. When you recognize or when you find beehives in an area, you should alert the office and let them know to put a note on the file so that future technicians going out there are looking for beehives and can stay away. Flowering trees and shrubs aren't so much of a problem with damage directly to the plant. However, if a shrub or a tree is flowering, and this is much more for the plant healthcare guys than for you working in lawn care, we should not be treating flowering shrubs or trees. If a rhododendron's in flower, if a crabapple is in flower, you do not want to be spraying it because you're likely going to be killing some bees. Any property line, be careful of, okay? And I think you all recognize there are property lines that are wide open between neighbors. There's some property lines where you've got a 12-foot high edge that separates the two properties. If the neighborhood is wide open and there are neighbors, their children or toys or whatever are not on your lawn, but are on the lawn 2 feet away from you, you need to be particularly careful with not just with weed control, but everything we're spraying and spreading. Open windows, okay? You should at least glance at a house if you're getting up close to a house in most cases. The lawn is separated from the house by shrubs or by mulch beds, but you should be aware that if you're up really close to a house, you've got to be very careful around open windows. And finally, any time you run into a fish pond or a pool or a bird bath, stay away. There's no reason to be up close to it. Stay away from it. Once again, let me reiterate, vegetable gardens are our principal problem where we get ourselves into more trouble. If there's any question about spraying, if there's a question, what kind of questions are you going to have? Are neighbor kids up? Okay, and not just neighbor kids, but if they're children of the customer that you're dealing with, we shouldn't be spreading or spraying if those kids are on the property. If there's a beehive, I say over there, what I'm referring to is that if there's a beehive on the neighbor's property or on the property that we are treating, be very careful of beehives. Once again, open windows. I can't get too close to the vegetable garden, or is it too windy? We'd far rather have you not spray, skip it altogether, or write up a we will be back. We have never gotten ourselves in trouble or had a customer complaint where we explained to somebody, I'm uncomfortable spraying weeds today, or I'm uncomfortable spraying any closer to that vegetable garden today because of wind and the potential for drift. Backpack sprayers, okay? Here's a 20-year-old picture of Rob Milton using a backpack sprayer from many years ago when he was a young man, okay? Make sure, pardon?
As opposed to now.
As opposed to now.
At least now,
Yeah, I thought he forgot how to use a backpack sprayer.
or that.
Okay. We want to minimize drift by making sure we're not using too much pressure. Okay, we want to walk slowly, particularly if it's windy, and use the correct nozzles. Is it a T-Jet 8000, Michael, that we're still using?
Yep.
Okay, once again, when we hand you a new backpack sprayer, that nozzle should already be on it. If it is windy, make certain that when you swing your arm from side to side, you limit how much you're swinging your arm. Don't try to spray 15 feet to your right and 15 feet to your left. Why don't you try, if it's real windy, or if you're concerned, spray 4 feet to your right and 4 feet to your left. I know you're going to do a little bit more walking. You're going to have to make a few more passes, but at the end of the day, you're really reducing the likelihood of causing damage. If edging along a plant bed, walk along the edge and stop spraying right at the edge. In other words, instead of spraying way to the right and way to the left, as you walk along the edge of the plant bed, stop right at the edge of the bed. Okay, you don't need to spray into the bed. Don't try to spray into the bed. Okay, but you can somewhat limit the potential for damaging plants if you walk right along the edge. And as you're Our motion swings back, stop at the edge of the bed. So you're throwing product only in one direction, that direction being away from the bed. Okay. And again, I reiterate, I sound like a broken record, but if it's too windy, skip some weeds. Z sprays. You can get yourself in trouble with a Z spray just as quick as you can get yourself into trouble with a backpack sprayer. You got to remember, in this case, you're using a fixed boom, a fixed spray boom, and be very careful of overspray, particularly if you're going too fast. If there's a lot of shrubs in the area, if there's small areas with a fixed boom, it's very easy to turn too fast or turn too late, and then directly get your liquid weed control on plants or shrubs which are right along the edges. So watch overspray, particularly as you're turning corners. You all are familiar with the shutoff valves to shut off the appropriate nozzles to reduce the spray width. As Michael mentioned earlier, don't forget, you're going to want to turn the pressure down. And I know it's hearsay to suggest it, but use a backpack sprayer on small lawns and narrow strips and in tight areas, okay? There's nothing that says if you're on a small lawn or a medium-sized lawn and you've got a narrow strip that's got shrubs to the right and flowers to the left, there's nothing to say you can't get that back sprayer out and take your time and take a couple of extra minutes to spray it instead of trying to make your Z spray take care of it. It might be a little bit faster, but it's going to be very difficult to control the weed control in terms of putting it where you want it. All right. Properties that can be a challenge. Okay, I just wanted to show you this picture as an example of where you have to be very careful, especially with a Z spray. You've got some kind of whatever on the right-hand side there. It looks like hostas. Along the left-hand side, you have flowers and all kinds of perennials. This particular lawn is a prime example of where we can get ourselves in trouble real quick, particularly when there's low plants, low perennials, low flowers, right along the very edge. In this particular case, there's no mulch in between the grass and the flowers or the plants. You have to be especially careful in this particular situation. And finally, vegetable gardens. I'm showing you a couple of different pictures here of vegetable gardens. The vegetable garden on the right, I think most you and everybody else would recognize that as being a vegetable garden. It's got cabbage and lettuce and all kinds of things growing in there. Okay, it's a nice, neat rows. Clearly, that's a vegetable garden. You don't find vegetable gardens that are that pretty, okay, in most particular cases. Most people's vegetable gardens look like the garden on the left-hand side. It looks like somebody hasn't tended to it for the last 4 years, but indeed, that is somebody's prized vegetable garden. Okay, so take a close look. Keep in mind that vegetables are especially sensitive, especially tomato plants, and stay clear. Our new policy, okay, which we started last year, is we want you to stay at least 20 feet away during June, July, and August. 20 feet away from vegetable gardens. That's basically between Memorial Day and Labor Day. It's okay to spread fertilizer in that area. Keep the fertilizer out of the vegetable garden. Use your deflector if it's necessary, but with granular product, it's okay to get closer to a vegetable garden. But with liquid product between Memorial Day and Labor Day, stay out of there. Don't worry about spraying weeds in that area. We can always take care of the weeds after Labor Day or before Memorial Day. All right? Be careful, please. Any questions?
The only other thing that I'd add is we get into a lot of problems when we're starting, when we have a newer person, right? Because I think we're trying to do too much with the Z spray. Just because you have a Z spray doesn't mean you have to use it on every lawn in every situation. And it doesn't mean you have to do both spreading and spraying at the exact same time all the time. You can get yourselves into trouble, because I've gotten myself into trouble trying to, especially if you're using a machine that you're unfamiliar with, or it's been a while since you've used a machine, or you're brand new to using a machine, You're trying to drive the machine in a somewhat straight lines. You're making sure your fertilizer pattern's right, and then you're playing with either the foot pedal. I've always thought it was a good idea for newer people to spread it once, and then until you're comfortable, go back and either spot spray with a Z spray, or like Jim said, grab the backpack and use and get weeds that way. I feel like there are some times, especially some technicians can get jammed up. I'm driving, I'm turning the thing on and off, I'm getting the weed control, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, I'm getting close to an edge. And again, if you're out in the 45M backyard that's wide open, just blast, just get it done. Awesome. But I'm trying to go around a corner, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, and you're doing too many things at once. And again, that the muscle memory is not there yet. All right, you gotta, don't be afraid to like, okay, I'm gonna go a little slower on this one. All right, especially those small ones.
Okay, everybody? Okay, be careful.
Always.